The following year in Pine Creek brought a subtle shift to Maria Thompson's life. Though the town's whispers never fully disappeared, the seasons changed, and with them, small signs of life and renewal appeared. Flowers bloomed in the garden, the sun warmed the fields, and birdsong filled the mornings. Yet Maria knew the beauty outside could never fully erase the shadows of grief and loneliness she carried inside. One crisp morning, as she walked along the dusty road to the market, Maria noticed a new face in Pine Creek, a man in uniform. Tall and steady, was speaking with a shopkeeper near the general store. He introduced himself as Sheriff Daniel Hayes, recently transferred from a neighboring county. His presence brought a sense of calm and authority, but what struck Maria most was the quiet kindness in his eyes. He did not look at people with suspicion or judgment. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding the town and the people who lived there at first. Maria kept her distance, unsure if she could trust anyone again. The town had already made her cautious, teaching her that kindness could sometimes be mixed with gossip or ulterior motives. Yet she could not help noticing how the sheriff treated children, waved at him, elders, nodded in respect, and neighbors spoke freely around him. Unlike the others, he seemed to judge no one too quickly. Their first encounter happened, by chance one afternoon, at the edge of the town square. Maria was struggling to carry a basket of vegetables back to her home, and one of the handles snapped. The basket tipped, spilling tomatoes and carrots across the dirt path. She knelt quickly to gather them, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Before she could mutter an apology to anyone, a strong hand offered assistance. "Let me help you with that," said the sheriff, his voice gentle but firm. Maria looked up, startled. The kindness in his eyes was unfamiliar, yet comforting. With his help, she gathered the scattered vegetables, feeling a sense of relief she had not known in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. Embarrassed by her clumsiness, "No need to thank me," he replied with a warm smile. "It's good to meet you. I'm Daniel Hayes, the new sheriff." "And you are Maria?" "Maria Thompson," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. She could not help noticing that he did not avert his eyes or seem put off by the rumors she knew swirled about her. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Thompson," he said. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We all have to look out for each other here." Maria nodded, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. No one in Pine Creek had ever spoken to her like that before, without judgment, without whispers, without a hidden agenda. She carried her basket home, her thoughts lingering on the sheriff's words and the calm authority with which he spoke. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not as the cursed widow of Pine Creek, but as a person worthy of respect. Over the next few weeks, Sheriff Hayes continued to make his presence known in quiet, thoughtful ways. He visited the market regularly, spoke kindly to shopkeepers, and checked on families in the town. But it was his interactions with Maria that gradually drew her attention and curiosity. He would occasionally offer a friendly nod when passing by her home, ask about her garden, or help with minor tasks that seemed too heavy for her to handle alone. These gestures were small, but they carried weight. They reminded Maria that not all people were quick to judge, and that there was still goodness in the world. One rainy afternoon, Maria faced a serious challenge. A section of her barn roof had weakened, and the heavy rainfall threatened to damage the stored crops and tools inside. She tried to fix it herself, climbing the ladder with a hammer and nails, but the rain made the wood slippery and dangerous. Just as she was struggling to balance herself, a shadow appeared at the edge of the barn. "Careful there," called a familiar voice. Looking up, Maria saw Sheriff Hayes approaching, his coat shielding him from the rain. Without hesitation, he climbed up beside her, steadying the ladder and helping her secure the loose boards. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the sound of rain on the roof mixing with the rhythm of their efforts. Maria felt a sense of relief, not just for the help, but for the company. She had grown used to being alone, but his presence was reassuring, a silent reminder that someone cared. "Thank you," Maria said once the boards were secure, her voice quiet but sincere. "Anytime," he replied with a small smile. "It's what neighbors do for each other." It was during moments like this that Maria began to notice something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of hope. The sheriff did not treat her as a subject of gossip or a symbol of misfortune. He treated her as an equal, as someone capable and deserving of respect. His quiet patience and steady support made her feel safe in a town that had once felt hostile and unforgiving. As the days turned into weeks, Maria found herself looking forward to these small interactions. She would see him patrolling the town, checking on homes and businesses. And she realized that he carried a sense of duty that was rare and admirable. His presence brought a subtle change to the town as well. People began to act with more courtesy and restraint. Realizing that the sheriff's eyes were not quick to judge, but were steady and fair. One evening, after a long day of work on the farm, Maria sat on her porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange and pink, and the fields were bathed in soft light. Sheriff Hayes walked past her home, tipped his hat, and offered a friendly nod. Maria smiled quietly, feeling a warmth in her heart that she had not experienced in months. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of friendship, trust, and even companionship. She still carried her grief for Robert, and she knew that she always would. But she also realized that life could hold more than sorrow. There was room for hope, for new connections, and for the kindness of others. Sheriff Hayes had become a symbol of this possibility, a reminder that even in a town full of judgment, there were people who could see her for who she truly was. One day, the sheriff invited her to join a small community event in the town square. It was a simple gathering, with families sharing food and children playing games. Maria hesitated at first, unsure if she could face the gossiping eyes of the townspeople. But the thought of spending time in a supportive, welcoming environment gave her courage. She agreed to attend, and the sheriff greeted her warmly, introducing her to a few neighbors, who treated her with kindness rather than suspicion. The event became a turning point for Maria. She realized that the town was not entirely unkind, that there were people who could see past the whispers and recognize her worth. The sheriff's steady presence gave her the confidence to engage with others, to share a smile, and to feel a sense of belonging she had thought lost forever. Over the next months, Maria and Sheriff Hayes continued to cross paths. Each encounter was gentle and unassuming, yet it left a lasting impression on her. She found herself looking forward to these moments, appreciating not only his help and guidance, but also his quiet friendship. For Maria, who had lived in isolation and endured judgment, this connection was like sunlight breaking through clouds, a sign that life could still hold warmth and care. Through these interactions, Maria began to feel a shift within herself. She realized that her strength was not only in enduring hardship, but also in allowing herself to accept kindness and support. She understood that trusting others did not diminish her independence. It enriched her life and gave her a sense of community that she had long been denied. Maria Thompson's life, once dominated by grief and whispers, was slowly being transformed. Sheriff Hayes had entered her world not with grand gestures, but with quiet respect and steady support. He showed her that kindness could exist even in a town that had once seemed cruel, and that hope could emerge even after loss. For the first time, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future where sorrow and joy could coexist, where grief could live alongside new beginnings, and where she could find companionship and understanding in unexpected places. By the end of this year, Maria had grown not only in strength, but in hope. She faced each day with renewed determination, tending her farm, caring for her children, and gradually allowing herself to trust again. Sheriff Hayes remained a steady presence, a reminder that goodness could exist even amidst hardship. And for Maria, this quiet friendship became a beacon, guiding her through the challenges of the present and illuminating the possibilities of the future. After the first months of shock and grief, Maria Thompson's life slowly settled into a quiet rhythm, though it was far from peaceful. The townspeople of Pine Creek still whispered about her wherever she went, and the sting of their judgment remained sharp. But Maria had grown stronger in those months. She learned to move through her days with careful steps, holding her head high, even when it felt like the world was pressing down on her. The house she shared with Robert became both her sanctuary and her prison. The walls held memories that both comforted and pained her. she would often stand in the living room, staring at the spot where Robert used to sit with his newspaper, imagining the sound of his laughter or the way he would tease her about her cooking. These moments of memory brought tears, yet they also reminded her of why she had to continue, because love, even lost, was worth honoring. Maria spent her days tending the farm, a task that was both exhausting and grounding. The soil, the animals, and the plants required her attention, leaving little room for despair to take hold. She would rise before dawn, feeding the chickens and cows, collecting eggs, and checking the fences. Working the land reminded her of Robert's presence. Every corner of the farm carried traces of his hard work, the sturdy barn he had built with his own hands, the garden beds he had planted, the tools he had carefully maintained. Caring for these things felt like a way to keep him alive in her heart, even if only in memory. Yet no matter how much she tried to stay busy, the town's whispers followed her like shadows. On her trips to the market, she would hear a mother warn her child, "Don't go near her. She brings bad luck." Children would peek at her from behind their parents, unsure whether to wave or hide. Even at church, where she had once felt a sense of community, she was now met with cold eyes and subtle avoidance. The sense of isolation was heavy, and some days it felt as though the weight of the world rested entirely on her shoulders. Despite this, she knew that hatred and gossip did not define her worth. She found small ways to show kindness and compassion, even when the town did not reciprocate. She would help carry a neighbor's heavy basket, offer a hand to a child struggling with chores, or share a loaf of bread with someone in need. These acts were quiet and often unnoticed, but they sustained her spirit and reminded her that goodness could exist even in a world full of judgment. During these months, Maria also discovered her own inner strength. She learned to face challenges without relying on others, whether it was fixing a broken fence, tending to sick animals, or handling repairs around the house. Each task completed became a small victory, proof that she could survive on her own if necessary. Her independence grew, though she wished it could exist without the burden of loneliness. The loneliness, however, was a constant companion. Even in the midst of work, Maria felt the absence of Robert keenly. She would catch herself reaching for him in the kitchen or expecting him to appear in the doorway after a long day. The evenings were the hardest, when the house grew quiet and shadows stretched across the walls. Sometimes she would sit by the fireplace for hours, staring into the flames, listening to the wind outside and thinking of what could have been. Her heart ached, but she refused to let it crush her completely. She knew that surviving meant carrying grief with dignity, rather than letting it consume her entirely. One spring morning, as the sun began to warm the fields, Maria noticed a small act of kindness that lifted her spirits. Mrs. Whitman, an elderly woman from down the road, had left a basket of fresh vegetables on her doorstep. There was no note, no explanation, only a gentle gesture of care. Maria felt her heart swell with gratitude, realizing that not everyone in Pine Creek wished her harm. It was a small sign, but it reminded her that compassion could still exist. Amidst cruelty, Maria began to notice more of these small gestures over time. Children would wave at her shyly from across the street, and some neighbors offered polite greetings when she passed. These moments were fleeting, but they reminded her that the world was not entirely unkind. They also gave her a quiet hope that perhaps one day she could find connection again. Despite her growing strength, Maria faced new challenges as well. The farm required constant attention, and the demands of daily life were never-ending. Illness, bad weather, and unexpected accidents tested her resilience. She learned to handle them with patience and careful planning, relying on her wits and determination to overcome obstacles. Each challenge faced and solved was a testament to her endurance, and she began to see herself not just as a grieving widow, but as a capable woman who could navigate life's difficulties on her own. Through it all, Maria remained determined to honor Robert's memory. She spoke of him often to her children, sharing stories of his kindness, humor, and hard work. She taught them the lessons he had taught her: to treat others with respect, to work diligently, and to face challenges with courage. In this way, she kept his spirit alive, not only for herself, but for the next generation. Even with these small victories, Maria could not ignore the whispers entirely. Some townspeople still avoided her, and others made cruel jokes behind her back. But she had learned to rise above their words. She realized that their opinions did not define her value. What mattered was her own heart, her own actions, the love she carried for her family and her memories. In the evenings, Maria would often sit in her garden, watching the sun set over the fields. The colors of the sky reminded her of the beauty that still existed in the world, even amidst sorrow. She found comfort in nature, in the rhythm of the seasons, and in the quiet moments of reflection. Each sunset became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even after darkness, light would return. Maria's life in those months was a delicate balance of sorrow and hope. She carried grief like a heavy cloak, yet she also nurtured resilience like a small flame. The town might call her cursed or misfortune, but she refused to let their words define her. She worked tirelessly, loved quietly, and faced each day with courage. Slowly, she began to reclaim a sense of self, discovering that even in loneliness, she could find purpose and strength. She also learned to find joy in small, everyday moments. A bird singing outside her window, a letter from a distant friend, the laughter of her children playing in the yard. These simple pleasures reminded her that life could still hold happiness. She allowed herself to feel these joys even when grief lingered nearby, understanding that it was possible to carry both sorrow and hope at the same time. By the end of the first year after Robert's passing, Maria had transformed. She was no longer just the grieving widow of Pine Creek. She had become a woman of quiet strength, capable of facing adversity with grace and dignity. Though the town's whispers had not entirely ceased, she had learned to move through them without losing herself. She had discovered her own resilience, the importance of kindness, and the power of hope. Maria Thompson's life in these months was a story of survival, courage, and endurance. She faced humiliation and loneliness, yet she never allowed despair to take root fully. She tended her farm, cared for her children, and found small moments of joy and connection. She kept Robert's memory alive, and through her actions, she began to carve out a place for herself in a town that had once sought to diminish her. In the quiet moments of reflection, Maria realized that her life was not defined by the opinions of others. It was defined by her own choices, her own strength, and her capacity to love despite loss. She had endured the harshest of judgments and emerged not broken, but stronger. More aware of her own resilience and more determined to continue forward, though challenges remained. Maria faced the future with cautious hope. She knew that life would never be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength to endure whatever came her way. And in that strength, she found a quiet sense of peace, a recognition that even in a world filled with judgment and sorrow, she could still find purpose, love, and the courage to keep moving forward. Maria Thompson had always been known in Pine Creek as a quiet, gentle woman. She lived with her husband Robert in a small, weathered house on the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and the trees whispered with the wind. Everyone in town knew them as a simple, hard-working couple. Robert worked at the local sawmill, coming home each evening with tired hands, but a smile for Maria, while she kept their home tidy and warm. Cooking meals and tending to their modest garden, life had been steady, not perfect, but good. Maria enjoyed the small joys, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the laughter of children playing in the dirt streets, and the quiet evenings when Robert would read aloud from a book by the fireplace. The townspeople saw her as pleasant but unremarkable. She was the kind of woman who faded into the background, never asking for attention and never causing trouble. Then came the accident that changed everything. It was a cold winter morning when Robert did not return from work. Maria's heart had felt uneasy all day, but she tried to calm herself, telling herself that he must have stayed late at the mill or stopped at the store. But as the hours passed and darkness fell, a knock came at her door. Standing there was Deputy Harris, his face serious and solemn. He gently explained that Robert had been injured in a logging accident. Maria could not comprehend his words at first. She felt her stomach drop and her hands grow cold. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. Robert had passed away. The loss left Maria shattered. She wandered through the house in a daze, touching the things Robert had left behind, his coat still hanging by the door, the half-finished cup of tea on the counter, the worn boots by the fireplace. Every corner of the home echoed with his absence. Nights were the hardest. Maria would lie awake, listening to the wind howling outside, imagining Robert walking through the door, telling her everything was fine. But the door remained closed. She cried silently, not wanting the neighbors to hear, though she knew they were already whispering about her. In Pine Creek, grief rarely traveled alone. Almost immediately, Maria became the subject of cruel gossip. Some whispered that her misfortunes were the result of a curse, that losing her husband so suddenly was a sign of bad luck following her everywhere. Others hinted that there was more to Robert's death than what was said. At the market, mothers would tug their children away when she passed. At church, women would avoid sitting near her, glancing nervously at one another as if her presence could bring misfortune. Even familiar faces she had known for years now looked at her with suspicion or pity. Maria felt the weight of their judgment keenly. Each stare and each whisper made her feel smaller, as though the walls of her house were closing in. Friends she had trusted before seemed to vanish, leaving her alone with her grief and the cold echo of the town's harsh words. She began to retreat further, speaking less and avoiding public places whenever she could. Even simple trips to the well or the store became acts of courage. Each time she stepped outside, she felt as though the eyes of the town were upon her, waiting to witness her misfortune. Despite the isolation, Maria did her best to maintain some sense of normalcy. She tended to her garden, feeding the chickens and watering the vegetables. She baked bread and mended clothes, trying to keep the house in order. The routine was comforting, a fragile thread holding her to the world. Her neighbors would sometimes catch glimpses of her through the windows, and some would comment on how strong she seemed, but their words were often mixed with judgment. Being called strong felt hollow when it came with whispers about curses and bad luck, yet Maria did not give in to bitterness. She remembered Robert's gentle voice telling her to be brave, to face each day with dignity. She tried to hold on to that memory, even when sorrow seemed unbearable. She spoke kindly to the children in the neighborhood, offered help to anyone in need, and quietly endured the scorn of the townspeople. Still, each day was a struggle, and the loneliness weighed heavily on her spirit. Her evenings were often the hardest. She would sit by the fireplace, staring at the empty chair across from her, imagining Robert's laughter and the sound of his voice. Memories flooded her mind, moments of happiness she could never reclaim. She missed the way he would hold her hand while they walked through the fields, the comfort of his presence when storms raged, the simple joy of sharing a meal together. These memories were both a solace and a pain, a reminder of what she had lost and what the town refused to see. One evening, after a particularly harsh day of gossip and whispers, Maria sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea she could not taste. She thought about leaving Pine Creek, escaping the stares and cruel words. Perhaps a fresh start in another town would free her from the shadow that seemed to follow her. Yet, she felt tied to the home she had shared with Robert, to the fields he had loved, to the memories that still lingered in every corner. Leaving would be like abandoning the past, and she was not ready to do that. As winter turned to spring, Maria began to notice subtle changes. Small acts of kindness, sometimes unnoticed, reminded her that not everyone in Pine Creek wished her harm. A neighbor left a basket of eggs on her porch without a word. Children waved shyly from across the street. Even though the whispers continued, there were glimpses of humanity that gave her a quiet hope. She realized that endurance might be her only shield against cruelty, and that even in a town full of judgment, there were sparks of compassion to be found. Maria continued to move through her days with cautious determination. She carried grief like a heavy cloak, but she also carried the memory of love and the quiet strength that had defined her life before tragedy. She learned to face the townspeople with her head held high even when they looked away or murmured behind her back. Though the shadow of being the cursed widow lingered, she began to reclaim a sense of self, small step by small step, every night. She would light a candle by the window, a symbol not only of remembrance for Robert, but also of her hope for the future. Though the town called her names and whispered rumors, Maria refused to let their words define her entirely. She nurtured her resilience even in solitude. and waited for a day when perhaps she could step out of the shadow of grief and into something brighter. Maria Thompson's story in those early months of widowhood was one of quiet courage. She endured humiliation with dignity, faced the judgment of the town with quiet strength, and clung to the memory of love that had once filled her life. Though loneliness pressed heavily upon her, she never allowed despair to fully take hold. The world outside her small home may have seemed harsh and unkind, but inside, she held on to a flicker of hope. A determination to survive and honor the life she had shared with Robert. Spring had turned to summer in Pine Creek, and the town was alive with activity. Children ran along dusty streets. Merchants displayed fresh fruits and vegetables in the market. And the fields around Maria Thompson's home were green and full of promise. Despite the warmth and vitality of the season, Maria's life remained a careful balance between hope and caution. She had grown stronger over the past year, learning to navigate grief, loneliness, and the whispers of judgment that still lingered in the town. But even with her growing confidence, she knew that life could still bring unexpected challenges. One morning, as Maria tended her garden, she noticed a group of children playing near the edge of the farm. Their laughter echoed through the fields, and she felt a small surge of happiness at the sight. But then she heard a sharp cry, followed by the frantic barking of her dog. Alarmed, she ran toward the noise, her heart pounding. She saw smoke rising near the barn and realized, with a jolt of fear, that a fire had started. Flames licked the wooden walls, and the wind threatened to spread it to the rest of the farm. Panic surged through Maria. She shouted for her children to stay back and ran toward the barn, trying to beat the flames with a bucket of water. The fire crackled and roared, threatening to engulf everything she had worked for. Her hands were blistered and her arms burned from the heat, but she refused to give up. She fought to control the blaze, her heart racing as memories of Robert's presence seemed to guide her determination. The farm, her home, and her livelihood were all at stake. Just as the fire began to spread beyond her control, a familiar voice rang out. "Maria, step back." It was Sheriff Daniel Hayes. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the fire, carrying a coil of rope and a bucket of water. He coordinated her efforts, directing her where to pour water and how to contain the flames. Together, they fought the blaze, their movements precise despite the chaos. Sweat dripped down their faces, and the heat was almost unbearable, but neither gave up. The sheriff's calm presence and steady guidance gave Maria the courage to keep going. And slowly, the fire was brought under control. Once the flames were extinguished, Maria collapsed onto the grass, exhausted and trembling. The barn was damaged, but it had not been completely destroyed. The crops and tools were mostly saved, thanks to their combined efforts. Sheriff Hayes knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly. "That's what matters." Maria looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, not only from fear and exhaustion, but from gratitude. She realized in that moment how much his presence had changed her life. He had been there when she needed help most, not judging or questioning her, but simply supporting and protecting her. News of the fire spread quickly through Pine Creek. Some townspeople rushed to offer assistance, bringing buckets of water, blankets, and tools. Even those who had once whispered about Maria seemed to understand that she had faced a true crisis. The sheriff's involvement had also changed their perspective. They saw not a cursed widow, but a brave woman who had fought to save her home, aided by a man who respected her and recognized her strength. In the days that followed, the town came together to help repair the barn. Neighbors offered wood, nails, and labor, and Maria realized that the fire, though devastating, had sparked a new sense of community. She worked alongside others, her hands raw and sore, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. She felt a sense of belonging that she had not experienced in years. For the first time, she began to see that the whispers and judgment of the past could be replaced by respect and cooperation. Throughout this time, Sheriff Hayes remained a steady presence. He checked on her every morning, offering encouragement and guidance, and stayed late into the evenings, helping with repairs and making sure the work was done safely. He never overstepped, never made her feel dependent, but always offered support when she needed it. Their connection deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Maria found herself looking forward to his visits, not just for the help, but for the sense of companionship and understanding he brought into her life. One evening, after the barn was finally repaired, Maria and the sheriff sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The air was warm, filled with the scents of blooming flowers and fresh earth. The farm, once threatened by fire, now stood resilient and alive. Maria felt a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. "You've done well," Sheriff Hayes said quietly, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "You didn't give up, even when things seemed impossible." Maria smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "I had help," she admitted softly. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You're stronger than you realize," he said. "But even the strongest people need someone by their side sometimes. There's no shame in accepting help." Those words lingered in Maria's mind long after the sheriff had left for the evening. She realized that strength was not just about enduring hardship alone. It was also about recognizing the value of support, trust, and connection. In that moment, she began to understand that life could hold both independence and companionship, sorrow and hope, loss and love. As the summer progressed, Maria's relationship with the sheriff continued to grow, though it remained quiet and respectful. He would stop by to check on her farm, offer advice, or simply share a moment of conversation. Each interaction brought comfort and reassurance, and Maria found herself opening up in ways she had not in years. She spoke of her grief, her memories of Robert, and her hopes for the future. The sheriff listened with patience and understanding, never rushing her or making her feel judged. Their friendship became a source of strength for Maria. She realized that she no longer felt completely alone in the world. She had someone who saw her not as a symbol of misfortune, but as a capable, resilient, and worthy person. This realization brought a sense of hope she had not experienced in a long time. The town, too, began to change its attitude. People who had once avoided Maria, or whispered behind her back, now treated her with respect and consideration. They witnessed her courage during the fire and her steadfastness in rebuilding the barn. They saw her kindness to others and recognized the quiet strength that had carried her through hardship. Slowly, Maria became an accepted and valued member of the community once more. Despite the progress, Maria knew that life would continue to bring challenges. She had faced grief, judgment, and the threat of disaster, and she understood that more trials could come. But she also knew that she had grown stronger and wiser through these experiences. She had learned the importance of resilience, the value of kindness, and the power of trust and connection. One warm summer evening, as she stood in her garden watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Maria reflected on how far she had come. The months of fear, grief, and isolation seemed distant now, replaced by a sense of purpose, belonging, and cautious hope. She realized that life was not about avoiding pain or hardship, but about facing them with courage, learning from them, and finding joy and connection wherever possible. Sheriff Hayes' presence in her life had been transformative. He had shown her that kindness could exist even in a harsh world, that trust could be rebuilt, and that hope could flourish even after loss. Through his steady support, Maria had begun to heal not only from grief, but from the fear and loneliness that had once defined her existence. As the summer nights grew long and warm, Maria felt a quiet confidence in herself and in the future. She had endured humiliation, faced danger, and rebuilt her life with courage and determination. She had learned to accept help, to trust, and to believe in the possibility of new beginnings. And through it all, she had discovered that resilience, kindness, and hope could coexist, guiding her toward a life that, while different from what she had once imagined, was rich with meaning and promise. Maria Thompson's journey through these months was a testament to human strength and endurance. She had faced fire, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more open to life's possibilities. The sheriff had become more than just a helper. He had become a friend, a guide, and a symbol of the goodness that still existed in the world. And Maria, once called a cursed widow, now stood with renewed courage, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and open to the hope of love and companionship she had long thought lost. The following autumn in Pine Creek brought a quiet golden beauty to the town. Leaves painted the streets and fields in shades of amber, red, and gold, and the crisp air carried the scent of harvest and wood smoke. Maria Thompson moved through her days with a confidence she had never known before. The farm was thriving, the barn repaired, and her children were happy and healthy. But the most remarkable change in her life was not in the farm or the fields, it was in her heart. She had discovered something she thought impossible: hope for the future, and the possibility of love again. Over the past year, Sheriff Daniel Hayes had become an integral part of Maria's life. His presence had begun as small gestures, helping with chores, offering guidance, or simply sharing a kind word. But over time, those gestures grew into a deep and steady friendship. They shared moments of laughter, exchanged stories of their past, and found comfort in each other's company. Maria had come to trust him, not just as a helper, but as someone who understood her grief and valued her as a person. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, the sheriff arrived at Maria's home with a letter in hand. He handed it to her, smiling warmly. "It's for you," he said. "Thought you might like a break from paperwork and chores?" Maria opened the envelope and found an invitation to a town celebration honoring the community's hard work during the harvest. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the whispers and judgment she had faced in the past. But then she looked at the sheriff, and his calm, encouraging gaze gave her courage. "Thank you," she said softly, a small smile forming on her lips. "I think I'll go." The celebration was lively, with music, laughter, and the aroma of fresh food filling the air. Families gathered to share stories, children ran freely, and the town seemed to glow with warmth. Maria arrived with her children, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. As she walked through the crowd, she noticed that many people greeted her kindly, their expressions respectful rather than judgmental. Some even apologized for past whispers. Acknowledging the courage and strength she had shown over the past year, Sheriff Hayes stayed close by, offering reassurance and gentle guidance. He introduced Maria to neighbors and friends who had once kept their distance, and she found herself engaging in conversation with more confidence than ever before. The town, it seemed, was beginning to see her not as the widow they had once whispered about, but as a resilient and valued member of the community. As the sun began to set, the sheriff suggested they take a walk along the edge of the fields. The autumn light cast a warm glow over the landscape, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind created a peaceful backdrop. Maria walked beside him, her heart light, feeling a sense of connection that had been missing from her life for so long. "Maria," Sheriff Hayes began, his voice steady but soft, "I've watched you face so much in the past year. You've endured grief, hardship, and judgment with courage and dignity. I've seen your strength, your kindness, and the way you care for your family and your farm. You are truly remarkable." Maria felt her cheeks warm, but she looked at him with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. "I wouldn't have made it without your support." He paused, taking a deep breath. "There's something I want you to know," he continued. "I don't see you as a widow or as someone cursed by misfortune. I see you as the person you truly are: strong, compassionate, and full of courage. And I want to be a part of your life in every way that I can." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had dreamed of companionship and understanding, but hearing it spoken so clearly filled her with emotion. She realized that she had come to care deeply for the sheriff, and that he had come to care for her in return. The idea of love once lost with Robert now seemed possible again, not as a replacement for the past, but as a new chapter in her life. Sheriff Hayes reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. "Maria Thompson," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "will you marry me? Will you allow me to share my life with you and give you my last name so that we can face the future together, side by side?" Tears welled in Maria's eyes as she took in his words. This was not a proposal of grandeur or wealth, but of respect, trust, and genuine love. She saw in him a partner who would stand with her through challenges, celebrate with her in joy, and honor the life she had built for herself and her children. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will." The sheriff slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that simple gesture, a new chapter of Maria's life began. She felt a sense of peace and happiness that had seemed impossible in the months following Robert's death. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that life could hold both love and resilience, grief and joy. In the days that followed, the news of their engagement spread through Pine Creek. The town, which had once scorned Maria and whispered about her misfortune, now offered congratulations and well wishes. People marveled at her courage and the way she had rebuilt her life, and they saw in her union with the sheriff a story of hope, redemption, and love that transcended past hardships. Maria and Daniel worked together to prepare for their wedding, keeping it simple and meaningful. Friends and neighbors helped with decorations, food, and arrangements, and the celebration became a true reflection of the community's support and unity. Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the love she had found, but for the way the town had begun to embrace her once again. The day of the wedding was bright and warm. With the sun casting golden light over the fields, Maria walked down the aisle, her children at her side, and saw the sheriff waiting with a calm, reassuring smile. In that moment, she felt a sense of belonging that she had not known in years. The vows were exchanged with sincerity and love, and when the sheriff pronounced her as his wife, Maria felt a profound sense of joy and completeness. By taking his last name, Maria felt a symbolic transformation. She was no longer defined by grief or by the judgment of others. She was now a partner, a wife, a mother, and a valued member of the community. The hardships she had endured, the whispers, the isolation, the fire, and the constant struggle had shaped her into a woman of strength, resilience, and grace. And through it all, she had found love and support in a man who respected her and saw her true worth. In the days that followed the wedding, Maria and Daniel continued to build their life together. They worked side by side on the farm, shared quiet moments in the evenings, and supported each other through challenges. Their relationship was not built on grand gestures or perfection, but on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to face life together. Maria's children found in the sheriff not only a father figure, but also a source of guidance and care. The town of Pine Creek, which had once scorned and judged Maria, now looked to her as an example of courage and resilience. Her story became one of inspiration, a reminder that even after loss and hardship, life could offer love, hope, and new beginnings. People saw that strength was not only in enduring alone, but also in embracing support, connection, community. Maria Thompson's journey had come full circle. From grief, isolation, and whispers of misfortune, she had risen to a life filled with love, respect, and hope. Sheriff Daniel Hayes' presence had been the catalyst for change, showing her that trust and companionship could coexist with independence and resilience. Their union symbolized not only personal happiness, but also the triumph of courage, kindness, and perseverance over adversity. As the seasons changed once more, Maria often stood on her porch watching the sun set over the fields. The farm was thriving, her children were happy, and her heart was full. She reflected on the journey she had traveled from the depths of grief to the heights of hope and felt gratitude for the experiences that had shaped her. Every trial, every whisper, every challenge had led her to this moment of peace, love, and fulfillment. Maria Thompson had faced life's harshest trials and emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and open to the joys that life still had to offer. And as she walked hand in hand with her new husband, the sheriff who had stood by her side, she knew that the future held endless possibilities. Together, they would face whatever came their way, building a life filled with love, resilience, and the quiet happiness that comes from knowing that one is truly seen and valued. Her story, once defined by whispers and judgment, had become one of courage, redemption, and hope, a true testament to the strength of the human spirit and the transformative power of love.